Good morning, class. So today we're going to be learning about the scientific method. My name is Haley and I will be presenting to you today. So before we go over this little diagram of everything that happens in the scientific method, give me an idea of what the scientific method is. What do you already know? Yes.
Is the scientific method like the steps or like the questions that you ask to get like an answer?
Yes. So the scientific method is basically a list of steps that you take during an experiment. So that's good. We're on the right track. So before we begin, we're going to start with a bell ringer. It's just going to ask a simple question just to get your minds thinking. So the question is, what is a hypothesis? Yes.
Is that like the question that you ask, kind of?
Yes, it could be a question, but it's really an educated guess. It's a prediction of what is going to happen during the experiment, and it's not always right. So your hypothesis will either be proved or disproved in the experiment. Good job. All right, so today we will be learning about the scientific method. What is it? So the scientific method allows you to be able to ask questions and get answers during an experiment. It's a great way to dig deeper into the lesson and have a better understanding of what is going on in the experiment. It keeps us on track during an experiment. It gives us an organized plan of everything going on, and it really gets your mind thinking. Why are we learning about the scientific method? The scientific method is a great way to have a better understanding of what happens in an experiment. It helps you know where to start, what questions to ask, and it allows you to do some research. Here's some key points we'll be learning today throughout our discussion. What questions we'll be asking? We'll be asking some questions. We'll be digging deeper. We'll learn about drawing a hypothesis, and we'll end with some results and conclusions. The scientific method. Here's a list of everything that goes on during the scientific method. We have our observation, our question, our hypothesis, and like you said, it is a great way to ask questions, and it is our prediction of what happens in the experiment. Then we do our actual experiment, and then we come up with our conclusion, and then our result. Now, let's dissect the scientific method and learn it step by step. Step 1, our observation. It's receiving knowledge with our senses or recording information using scientific tools and instruments. So, our senses, we'll be smelling things. So like, let's say we're doing an experiment with flowers. We'll be smelling different flowers and seeing what's the difference between each one. We'll be using our eyes to see things. We'll be using our taste sometimes in experiments. Not usually, but sometimes you do. And we'll be using our hands to touch things and feel things. And we'll be using our ears to listen. It's recording data during your experiment. It is an observation of the information you obtained. Step 2, question. The question you come up with should be answered throughout the experiment. This question is your main goal and focus. Your question should be concise and clear so it can be answered thoroughly. So, what's a good question that is concise and clear that you can come up with during an experiment? Any question. What would be one?
Maybe like what's the difference between a sunflower and a daisy?
Yes, that's great. So if, like I said, if we're doing a experiment on flowers, that's a great question to ask if you're doing two separate flowers. So yeah, that's very clear and concise. Good job. Step 3, we'll come up with our hypothesis. It is a prediction or an explanation that is tested in the experiment. During your observation in the experiment, it may prove your hypothesis, or it may disprove it. We never know until we're actually doing our experiment. Your goal is to prove it in the end, but it might not always happen. Some like to call it an educated guess. Step 3, our experiment. This is a procedure that determines if your hypothesis and predictions will be proved. You are testing your hypothesis, and you're experimenting. You are also answering your main question. You will then end in a result when the experiment is over. So our experiment is where we're literally doing all of the steps. We're answering our question, we're coming up with our hypothesis, we'll end up with results. So yeah, this is like the main thing of the scientific method. Step 4, we have our conclusion. It is a statement based on the experiment, observations, and measurements. Basically a summary of everything that happened in the experiment. Just like when you're writing an essay, you end in your conclusion, and it's a summary of everything you talked about throughout your essay. This is where you state if your hypothesis was supported or not. And then step 5, this is our result. This is your last and final step. You will document what you found in your study. This is your outcome, and your questions should be answered by then. And we have our thumbs up. Great job. Now we have an exit ticket. Let's interact and answer these questions together to review everything you learned. And it also gives me an idea of what you learned, and that way next time I know what to go over again. So, let's go over these questions. What you predict will happen. What is that? What is it in the scientific method that you predict will happen? Yes.
Hypothesis?
Yes. So that is our prediction. That's our educated guess. Good job. So we'll write hypothesis. Okay. All right, number 2. The data you collect during your investigation or during your experiment. What is that? What's the data that you're collecting?
The observation.
Yes, when you're observing, you're collecting all the data. You're using your eyes, your nose to smell, your taste, your touch. So yeah, that is it. It's your observations. Observation. Okay. Number 3, the goal of the investigation. What is our main goal? Yes.
Is it to research, like to understand and learn new things?
Yes, our main goal is to get all of our research and to learn everything. Another one of the main goals of our investigation is our question, because by the end of the experiment, we should have answered our question. So I'm going to put question because that is really our main goal. All right, number 4. Complete list of things needed to test your hypothesis. So you can give me one. What's one thing that we do to test our hypothesis? Yes.
Is it the experiment?
Yes. During the experiment, this is where we find out everything. We're testing our hypothesis. We're answering our question. We did our observations and everything. So yes, it's our experiment. That is where you get to test your hypothesis. Okay? What does your data mean? The outcome of the investigation. Yes.
Is this the result?
Yes. Your data, all your data you collect is where you find your results. So it's our outcome, it's our result. Good job. Result. All right, and the last question is steps taken to test your hypothesis. What steps are taken to test it? Yes.
Is this, well, it's a scientific method, right? So the steps would be the scientific method, but that's kind of like all done in the experiment part?
Yes, it's all done in the, great job. That was a great answer. Yes, it's all done during your experiment. You're taking all these different steps. So you're observing, you're getting your question, and then you're ending your results. So yeah, to test your hypothesis, you're doing your actual experiment. Good job. Experiment. Okay, so it seems like we have a really good idea of what goes on in the scientific method. All right, and then our conclusion. All students should be familiar and know the steps of the scientific method. So now when you're doing an experiment, you can put this to use and have your experiment organized. The bell ringer before the lesson allows students to be able to get a head start of what we were learning. And then the exit ticket at the end of the lesson allows the students to be able to test their knowledge of what they learned, and it gives me, the teacher, an idea of what they have learned. So great job, and thank you.